Hey, hello, a lovely April 23rd, 2020 to all of you. Thank you for joining me today. This is Jeremiah, and this is Joy Vlog, episode number 4, Give to God. And I'm joining you today from the parched jungles of Belize in Central America. Thanks for joining me today. Today I want to talk about give to God, and I'm not talking about tithing. I'm not talking about you donating any money to me, so don't shut off quite yet. Stick with me for a few minutes. I'm hoping that maybe I can give you all or help you all with some revelation that the Lord gave me a little while back. I've been brought up in a Christian home, and I'm very thankful for my upbringing. But there was some things that I didn't get quite right, and not just from my family upbringing, but also the church upbringing that I had. And as I started to study these things out, they weren't quite what they seemed. What am I referring to? A passage that you're all probably very familiar with. It's recorded in 3 of the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record this particular exchange between Jesus and some of the Pharisees. Oh, the Pharisees loved to question Jesus. They were always trying to catch him off guard. But as most of you probably recognize, Jesus was never fooled, right? He always gave the right answer. But one of the exchanges that he had, I think most of the church completely misses, and they mistranslate and literally abuse this passage. And I don't think it's intentional. I just don't think they've really looked into it carefully and closely. And so I'm hoping all of you might consider the things that not just myself, but several other scholars and Bible researchers have also recognized. This passage is the famous "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's" passage. And most churches will say, well, see, this very clearly says we're supposed to pay our taxes. But I would argue Jesus is not teaching pay your taxes. So I'm going to break this down for you, and I'm hoping that the Lord might just reveal to you a little bit more of his heart and his intent. And let's just start. I'm going to read the passage out of Matthew 22. It says, "Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. 'Teacher,' they said, 'we know that you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?' But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, 'You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax.' They brought him a denarius. And he asked them, 'Whose image is this, and whose inscription?' 'Caesar's,' they replied. Then he said to them, 'So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's.' When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away." So you've probably heard this passage before, as I said. It's recorded in all 3 of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And in each one, it's a very similar narrative. But I want to break this down a little bit in a way that maybe you haven't heard. First of all, let's set the context a little bit. If we understand the historical context of what is happening in the time, we know that the Jews were under Roman control, right? So the Romans had moved in throughout Israel and were occupying and controlling and taxing the Jews, who were the natives of the land at the time, right? The Jews were not happy about the situation, right? They did not like being taxed. There was an imperial tax, meaning it specifically was, and it was what they call a census tax. So it was a tax against the entire population, and it was enriching the emperor, and the empire of Rome, the Roman Empire, who the Jews didn't invite to be there in the first place, and didn't really enjoy being under the control of the Roman authorities. So many of them even looked at this as a step towards slavery, right? Like they were being enslaved by the Romans, and literally, if they didn't pay their taxes, there was some pretty harsh punishments. And the Romans were known for not being very merciful, and there was a large amount of the Jews that were very revolutionary in their mindset. They wanted to overthrow the rule of the Romans and get out from under their heavy taxation and their control of their society and whatnot. So if you look into the history of that, it really sets a context. When Jesus came on the scene, we can see how many of the Jews wanted him to be a king. Even his own apostles were waiting for, okay, we're gonna, go into Rome and we're gonna overthrow them, and Jesus is gonna really show them who's boss, right? And that's why they were all so shaken, and downcast when Jesus was crucified. They didn't want to accept that Jesus, his role and his plan was for a crucifixion, that he would have to overcome sin and death, that his agenda was much bigger than their immediate circumstance. They were so fixated on what's happening to us and the oppression of the Romans, and Jesus, come save us, in our local, temporary, worldly, and fleshly desire to be out from under the burden of the Romans. Jesus's his agenda, his plan was so much bigger than that. He wanted to liberate all of humanity for all of time from sin and death and hell. And that's what Jesus accomplished on the cross. So, getting back to their question, when we look at this question, we have to recognize that the Jewish people were looking for somebody to liberate them from the Roman occupation, and ultimately the Pharisees rejected Jesus as the Messiah because he didn't do that. So they came with him with a loaded question. First of all, we have to ask ourselves, why did they think that they could trap him in his words, it says? With this question, this is the question that they asked. First, they butter him up with some flattery, right? They say, we know you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, right? So first they're buttering him up and they're flattering him. Oh yes, he's a rabbi. So this is kind of applying pressure to Jesus. Okay, if you're really a rabbi, if you're really a teacher of the truth, then you have to give us a truthful answer. So then the question, they say, tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax? Now, I don't think that they would try to trap him in his words if they were expecting him to say, yes, pay the imperial tax, right? All of his followers, the apostles that he had called to be with him, the Jews that he was preaching to and trying to reach directly, none of them wanted to pay the tax, right? I think it was their disposition that they believed, they had some inkling that he was against the imperial tax. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been much of a trap, right? They would have, if he would have said, no, you can't pay the tax, we don't do Caesar, I don't believe in the Roman Empire, or they're the oppressors, or whatever. If he'd outed himself as a revolutionary at that point, if he had outed himself as a collaborator, it was a catch-22. He would have been stuck either way, right? either he would have sided and say, yeah, go pay your taxes, we have to support, then he would have been seen as a collaborator. Really what this comes down to is they were getting him into a political catch-22, right? And we see this all the time in the media today, right? Politicians, they were always trying to get them caught between, oh, well, do you do it this way or this way? And trying to pigeonhole them into one thing. And some of them embrace that, but most of the time, politicians will give ambiguous answers so they don't get caught in the political trap. And I think Jesus does a brilliant job of it here because he sticks to the truth without giving in to the political temptation to go one way or another. But look, they say, okay, so again, the Pharisees, they're expecting him either to say, yes, pay your tax, in which case he's a collaborator, and the following of Jewish people that he has around him, their view of him is going to be diminished because they're going to see him as supporting the Roman Empire, who they see as the enemy. Or the other way around, if he says, no, don't pay your tax, then he's going to be counted as a revolutionary and become an immediate and a decisive threat and enemy to the Roman Empire, and they're going to target him immediately as a political enemy, right? But Jesus brilliantly handles, just as he always does, this question. So what happens? He asks them, right? He responds to their question, first of all, with a commentary. He says, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. So they brought him the denarius. And he asked them, whose image is this and whose inscription? Why does he go with this rhetoric where he responds to their question with a question? And let's look at the significance of this question that he asks them, right? He says, why are you trying to trap me? And he asked for the coin. Why did he ask for the coin? Certainly, they all knew what the coin looked like. Well, he wanted, first of all, I think, to point out that they had a coin readily available. And this is taking place in or close by the temple, right? And the significance of the coin. He gets the coin, and he looks at it, and he says, whose image is this, and whose inscription? Now, when he uses these two words, image and inscription, they immediately are going to trigger in the minds of all the Jews around him, including the teachers of the law and the Pharisees, the Shema. What is the Jewish Shema? The Shema is this prayer or a saying that they all know by heart. It's right here and right here, because in Deuteronomy and in Numbers, I believe, the Shema is given to the Israelites, and they are encouraged not only to know it, but to write it on their doorposts and metaphorically write it on their minds and their hearts and their souls, and pass it on to their children and teach it so they never forget that the image that they worship is one God. The Shema starts out, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, right? And the Shema goes on to mention, back to the Ten Commandments, right? The first commandment, love the Lord your God. The second commandment, have no inscription or image, graven image of God. And so these two words and ideas are prolific in the religious mindset of the Jews at the time. So he's referring to, again, the inscription and the image on the coin. Why? Because they're forbidden to have them. They're forbidden to use them. They're forbidden to worship them. And what is on the coin? Well, it's Caesar. Very clearly Caesar. Augustus Caesar. Circumscribed. The image is of Tiberius Caesar, who's the Caesar at the time. This is a little silver coin, by the way. And I'm going to read this. It says, circumscribed around, so the inscription around Tiberius was Latin and it was abbreviated, but if we translate that abbreviation into English, it was something like Tiberius Caesar, worshipful son of the god Augustus. And then if you turn the coin around and look at the back side, it says there's a picture of the Roman goddess of peace, Pax, P-A-X, and circumscribed around her is an abbreviation which means high priest. So on the front you've got Tiberius Caesar, and it says he's the worshipful son of the god Augustus. And on the back it has the Roman goddess of peace named Pax, and it says she is high priest. The coin of the tribute episode, so this whole narrative, the coin that they're looking at, this denarius, is a fine specimen of Roman propaganda. It imposes the cult of emperor worship and asserts Caesar's sovereignty upon all who transact with it. In the most richly iconic passage in the entire Bible, according to some, all three synoptic gospels depict the Son of God and the high priest of peace, the newly proclaimed by his people to be king, holding a tiny silver coin. So the Son of God is holding up this coin, which says God Caesar, and the prince, or the priest of peace. And who is holding it but the Son of God and the Prince of Peace? I mean, it doesn't get much more ironic than this scene, right? And these priests had this coin readily available at Jesus' request at the temple. So they have an engraven image inscribed with the writing that this is God, or a deity that we worship almost. And they had it readily available for them in the temple. Notice Jesus didn't pull it out of his own pocket. He asked them to produce it because he didn't use this. He would have recognized how sinful and how idolatrous it was. Going back to his first response to them, he says, "You hypocrites." Why did he call them hypocrites? Now it starts to make a little bit more sense. They're hypocrites because they're sinning in their even possession of this coin in the first place. Does that make sense? They're carrying around a coin that has a graven image of another god, another deity on it. And they're transacting in it. They're almost worshiping in it. I mean, when he throws the money changers out of the temple, they were all transacting in these Roman currencies, in these coins inscribed with the image of another deity. How does Jesus respond? He says, "Whose image is this and whose inscription?" And they say, "Caesar's." Then he says to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's." Of course, he's not saying pay your taxes. He's saying that's an idolatrous image, an idolatrous currency. Stop worshiping Caesar. Give it back to him. Have nothing to do with that. Right? He says, but give to God what is God's. Now let's bring this into our current context, right? Pull out a dollar bill out of your wallet and just look it over for a few minutes. Seriously, just pause this video, pull out a dollar bill and look at that bill and read the different things that are on it, and look at the symbols that are on that dollar in your wallet. We're not under the law of Moses anymore. The Shema meant a lot to these Pharisees. But we still are under the law of worshiping the Lord our God with all our heart and all our soul and our mind, and not putting any other thing in his place. All right, welcome back. Hope you had a good look at that dollar bill in your wallet. What'd you think about that? Man, it's crazy, all the symbols and the writings that are on there. Now recognize that most of that, all of that, is propaganda. All right? All of it is statements by our government to make us want to put our trust and our faith in them, in that currency. But I want you to know that currency will fail one day. There's no question. It's not a if, it's a when. Our only solid foundation is Christ. So Jesus then says, give to God what is God's. And this is the part where he's really exposing their hypocrisy, right? Because he recognizes that they are carrying around and worshiping idols every day. And then they're going to put an idol in his hand and ask him what to do with it. He would have said, stop worshiping other gods. Throw it away. Stop your idolatry. So what is his response to that? Give to God what is God's. So let me ask you another question. If the denarius that Jesus was holding in his hand had the image of Caesar and it was inscribed with his name, let me ask you a very serious question. Whose image do you carry? Whose name is inscribed in your heart, on your mind, on your soul? The Bible says that we were created in his image. And Jesus' response to them was, give to God what is God's. God created you. You were his child. Don't fall into the temptation of worshiping other gods. If there are idols in your heart, get rid of them. Throw them away. Give your heart back to God. He is our only firm foundation, period. Lastly, I want to read to you real quickly 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 4 through 18. This is a bit of a passage, but I just want you to think about this. Sorry, there's a bit of wind today, and so I'm struggling to manage a camera and a piece of paper. Okay, let's see if I can do this. It says 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 4 through 18. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, you are old and your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. But when they said, give us a king to lead us, this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, listen to all the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as king. They have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will claim as his rights. Listen to God's warning to the people. Verse 10, Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking him for a king. He said, this is what the king who will reign over you will claim as his rights. He will take your sons and make them serve with his chariots and horses, and they will run in front of his chariots. Some he will assign to commanders, to be commanders of thousands and commanders of 50s, and others to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and still others to make weapons of war and equipment for his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive groves and give them to his attendants. He will take 1/10 of your grain and of your vintage and give it to his officials and attendants. Your male and female servants and the best of your cattle and donkeys will take for his own use. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you yourselves will become his slaves. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen. but the Lord will not answer you in that day. God set up the kingdom of Israel. He led Moses to rescue his people from Egypt, and he brought them through the wilderness, and he settled them in the place where he had promised them, in Israel, in the land flowing with milk and honey under the leadership of Joshua. And all of that time leading them out, they had leaders, but they didn't have political leaders. They didn't have a king. A king was defined as being leader in 3 different ways: political, military, and religious. He didn't set him up a king. He was their king. He told them over and over and over, I will be your God and you will be my people. He was the king. He had representatives to help them with judicial matters, with economic matters. But he did not set up for them a king. He also put in place generals for military operations, like Joshua. All right? But he was supposed to be their political leader, their king, to be the ruler of all 3 of those assets of leadership. And they rejected that. They said, no, give us a king like the other nations. And so he honored their request. Something that is amazing about our relationship with God is he doesn't force us into anything. He gives us free will. So what are you doing with that free will? Are you worshiping those dollars in your wallet? Think about what they represent. Think about the image and the inscriptions that are plastered all over our currency. What does it matter to us? Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. I don't pledge allegiance to the flag anymore. Most of you know I used to be in U.S. military. I fought in the war in Iraq in 2004, 2005. I was, quote-unquote, a patriot. I keep saying I was because my view has shifted tremendously. I will not say the Pledge of Allegiance. I will stand and respect others' desire to do that, but my heart is allegiant and committed to the Lord alone. He is my King. This is not to say that we subvert or rebel against or despise or hate or revolt against the governments that are over us. I'm not saying that. I'm saying declare the sovereign ruler of your heart, your King, your Lord, to be the only one that matters, the only one that is a solid foundation. All others are sinking sand. These governments that we look up to, these political leaders, they cannot save us. Only the Lord. So I hope that's an encouragement to you today. I hope that you'll consider these things. Go back and review these passages. Check the links that I put in the details section below the video here, and look into it for yourself. Come to your own conclusions. But I believe that Jesus was very adamantly encouraging us against idolatry and to recommit and declare Him sovereign Lord of our life. And He avoided the issue of tax. He's not telling us pay your taxes. He's telling us commit yourself to the Lord, worship Him alone. Lord, I thank you for each person joining me today. I thank you for their heart, their desire, their quest for knowledge and for truth. Lord, I just pray that this will have been revelatory to them, Lord, that you would reveal yourself more in each one of their lives. I thank you for this time. Just pray your blessing on each one. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for joining me. Until next time.